Hi, my lovelies. Good morning. How are you guys doing? Happy new month. Happy August. I can't believe it's the 8th month of the year already. How time flies, huh? I hope by God's grace that we see it to the end. Guys, I'm so happy in a way that I'm recording today because I can't remember the last time I recorded this early in the month. So today is the fourth day of the month. I'm very, very glad in my heart. I couldn't walk all through the night. I felt so an overwhelming sense of, imposter syndrome, all of those things. I thought that rather than sit down with my feelings or feel sad or whatnot, let me just finish the book that I started yesterday. So, as I finished it, it was an interesting read somewhat. I had conflicted feelings. I said that while the essence of the whole plot, the story, and the book in itself still is with me, that might as well talk about it. So it might not be much of a full-on review, but just touch bases here and there. So the title of the book is David Mogo, The Godhunter by Suyi Davies Okungbowa. What I would normally do with our author, Suyi Davies was born in Benin. Funny how I assumed it was Yoruba because of the Okungbowa that I heard, but it seems like he was born in Benin. Well, then, when you think about it, Edo people, Benin people, and Yoruba people, they are like two sides of a coin. Even their languages are quite similar, so that kind of makes sense. So he was born in Benin. I think he schooled in Benin, that is masters in Lagos, all of those things. And then he seems like a very, very creative writer from what I'm seeing. And okay, yes, I think he's also an academic and a scholar in creative writing. When you look at his writing borders on culture, fantasy, especially speculative fiction and urban fantasy somewhat. Funny enough again that this God Hunter was his first book. I could feel the traces of a first time author or like big time writing. I figured, or I guessed that considering the fact that he's a scholar, especially one in creative writing, I think in a country, I think in UK or US, I forgot to check the part. I actually did check it, it just skipped my mind. But considering the fact that he is a scholar and an academia, I think he also teaches or lectures. So definitely he's had his own share of writing and whatnot. But you can tell in the book when you read it that okay, this seems like his first time writing a novel or somewhat. I just could tell even before I knew that that was his first book. There were small, small signs. I don't know how to. I don't know how I could see the signs or how I could tell the signs, but it just made sense when I now checked it that oh yeah, this is his first book. I think he won some prizes too. He deals in urban fantasy, speculative fiction, something that he merges African perspective with contemporaries, like and even science fiction too. Funny how again, I feel like I say that a lot too, but I'll do better. Funny how the first time I actually heard about him was on Substack, a guy that was talking about him. And when that guy was talking about himself, he was talking about him. The book that he was talking about was a science fiction. It was in that genre. I didn't even realize that he wrote fantasies like this, ones that had with Africanism and urban fantasy. I assumed it was just scientific fiction, speculative fiction. So it was that knowledge that I'd seen, and the guy was speaking so much about it. And for some reason, I think the guy seems this person on Substack seems very, very, he has, he knows his own as well when it comes to books and editor and whatnot. So I kept it into memory and I was like, I'm going to look out for this guy, considering the fact that I was like, oh, I have to read more Nigerian fictions this year. I think I mentioned it to you guys actually that I intend I would love to read non-Nigerian fictions. I've always had been skeptic about them. They just never really get it for me. For some reason, something just never really works. Is either the storyline or the plot or just the overall comprehension. Just it just put it just puts me off as someone who is used to complicated plot, complex plot, thrillers and crimes. That's not very common um African fiction actually. Yeah, that's not a common plot. I see that they are doing better now. I'm seeing a lot of fictions, crimes, small. It's not exactly up to the types that you would read for the Western world, but it's coming up. So I didn't really used to put my mind there as I normally read crime fictions and whatnot. So this year I was like, I'm going to really be intentional about African fictions, Nigerian fictions. I think that this is the second or third African fiction that I've read this year, and I think the first Nigerian themed or by a Nigerian author that I've read this year. I got one author one too that is by African, but I digress. So when I saw this book on Hazel status, I was like, I've seen Suyi Davies. This guy I used to talk about him was talking about him. The book he was even he normally talk or he spoke about that made me have this guy in my mind was The Lost Ark, and that was majorly science fiction according to what I read and the blog. So as I just saw it, I was like, you know what, let me just pick this book and I read it. And it was quite interesting. I won't lie to you. So before I go into I start yapping and rambling, I don't want us to keep missing the point, but let's just go into our overview of the God Hunter. It's an urban fantasy, a contemporary fantasy, and it was set in Lagos. And one of the things that I liked or that was very evident is you could tell that this guy lived in Lagos. The way he spoke about every turn, the bus stops, the roads, he was very specific, and I think I was proud of that fact. There are times that you will read some oh yeah, I made mistake. I read dream count. That's such a break in transmission. I read dream count this year. Yes, that's like second Nigerian fiction. So that was a mistake on my part. Yes, that was a mistake. Back to what I was saying. Sometimes when you read some Nigerian fiction, you can tell that this person didn't really live in Nigeria. They just have Nigerian parents or they were immigrant. But this guy, you could tell from his writing, from his knowledge, that he knows his honors, he knows what he was saying. You can tell that this guy he lived in Lagos. He probably didn't grow up in Lagos, but he lived a good part or a better part of his life in Lagos, and it was very evident in the way in his writing, in his location, how specific it was about a lot of things, and how very vivid it was in his description. So it goes about an apocalypse, a dystopian of some sort. After an event, a mysterious event, and was known as the falling. The event was termed as the falling, where the gods were and other supernatural beings were thrown out of Orun, an heavenly kind of, or should I say a spiritual realm kind of, let me not call it heavenly, but Orun means heaven, and that was how they termed it in the book. But I think it loosely translates to a spiritual realm accordingly. If you put it in terms of the way the book was written. So this it and it follows the rebellion that Shango and Agonjo, who their brother, their gods, their orishas, that they created in Orun. This is the spiritual realm that turned the Osha usurped the authority of Obatala, who was like the authority god, the Asha god Sha, and they usurped his authority, and that happened and caused Obatala to throw all the gods and all the orishas and a lot of spiritual beings down into earth. So that brought about an apocalypse. Oh my god. An apocalypse, and turned Lagos into a dystopian place of some sort. Since all these supernatural beings were turned, they were sent down to the human world. So it now became a place where ancient myths exist with the urban times as we know it. Because in his book, he was very definite about, or should I say, very vivid about the contemporariness. You could tell him mentioning whiskey, some internet and all of those things. So it was very urbanish and contemporary. So now imagine a world where spiritual beings, all those beings that you normally would read in libraries or in historian books, mythology, African mythology. Imagine those beings falling on earth and coexisting. I wouldn't even call it coexisting, but existing with those beings. So that kind of thing, that was quite creative of him to bring together. And you see vendors and high rises in an internet stable world. That sounds crazy. So at the center of all of this, we have David Mogo, who is a demigod, half human, half god, half Orisha. He's a reluctant god hunter. All those kind of people that people will go to me that, oh, there's a godling in my compound, in my street, and all of those things. He does the job of pursuing them or chasing them into oblivion, but he hunts these godlings. And so one his job is to track them down, these supernatural beings, these supernatural threats. But then he gets an assignment that draws him into a conflict far greater than what he anticipated, and brought about an opening for a full-blown war. And we see that David Mogo is, like I mentioned, he's a demigod, one that didn't really know of his origin. He was brought up by a foster grandfather who was a wizard. So you guys, this book was very, very crazy for me. So the book basically is part action, mythology, and exploration of life, but it was very, very African Nigerian centric. He really researched. He researched his Africanism, he researched his mythology, his Yoruba Nigerian gods, and again he set it in the one of the busiest cities, not just in Nigeria but in Lagos entirely. So, but overall, the book it blends Yoruba folklore, temporary urban life, and creates a story that is very local and very. One of the things that I think that I really took, that I enjoyed, or should I say that I applauded it for, is how he was able to mix, or should I say, was able to merge urban life as we know it now, as you know how life is, how urbanish life is now, especially Lagos, all the things that seem urban, Afro pop, hip hop, internet. He even mentioned there were times where he mentioned or he drifted into this SARS issue that we had issues with, but when it was scrapped before it was eventually scrapped. So he was very, very particular and very, very vivid with that description that you cannot miss that. Okay, he's merging mythology, folklore, mostly Yoruba folklore, and he also delved into Niger Delta and Igbo folklore too in a bit, and he merged all of them with the urban life. I think that was what really did it for me. Although I felt a bit of skepticism, and that wasn't a result of his writing or how good he wrote. It was just the theme and the genre in particular. If you guys have noticed, you realize that one of the themes, or rather, one of the genres that I really, rarely ever read, aside from romance, is fantasy. I never really got into it. I have no big issues against them. I'm just someone that, as much as I love exploration, I love creativity, especially when it comes to art, and love the very diverse form that art can take, and I'm always very open to that. But at the same time, I'm very, very careful to guard my mind. If there is one thing that I've learned from reading books, especially psychological theme books, is that books can be their windows to your soul, to be very honest. And as much as they can be entertaining, they can be a way to work on your mind. If so, you have to be very careful with what you allow into your heart, into your mind. And one of the things that has even helped me, especially as someone who loved psychological thrillers, that helped me, that it didn't really affect me and maybe have a long lasting impact aside from an educational or inspirational one, is that I'm able to get over what I read very, very quickly. I had to learn that skill, that I read this book, it had this much impact, I had to get over it immediately. That's why a book could cause me melancholy, heartbreak, and so whatnot, and I could pick another one and just get into something, because I know how much power words, written words, has over the mind, and especially good storytelling. And that was very evident in this guy's books, because you see, these gods, as a Christian, as a believer, you have to be very careful with your mind and the things that you feed him into it. You see, these gods that we see in Yoruba mythology, in our folklore, our ancient mythicism, and you see him write these things like you're reading a normal book. And at some point, I had to stop myself that I'm talking about Shango, they are talking about Ogun, or Batala, or Shun, Oya. Like, no, you're reading your normal book. And it was so interwoven, so well written, that I had to pause and what is going on. It wasn't a bad something, no. It was just good storytelling, so much that it was writing mythology in a way that seemed so seamless and effortless that I had to keep on my radar, my spiritual radar, that okay, I understand this is a work of fiction and all of that, but still, that's the good thing about storytelling. Good storytelling actually will have you rooting for murderers, will have you rooting for adulterers. Look at when this series, I don't know if you guys ever heard of that series, Lucifer. And this storytelling, it had us rooting for this series of Lucifer that everybody prays against, the devil, the demon, Satan, and you have yourself rooting for this guy according to a series, because it actually follows the biblical Lucifer series, until I heard a preacher talk about it and it called my attention. I don't want to digress so much, but that's the power of storytelling. Whenever it comes to God's realm, spiritual stuff like that, I try my very, very best not to really just intercept or find myself in that kind of stories. The most that I would do when it comes to fantasy, probably werewolves, mystical creatures, dragons, vampires, those ones I can come up with. In fact, they were one of the bases of my when I got back into reading werewolf books on Wattpad. But when we enter these realms of talking about God, spiritual beings, spiritualism, spiritism, mythology, it gets a bit miffy for me. It gets a bit miffy, and I was quite skeptical all through this book. But then, like I said, the power of storytelling, it was very, very well told. And I loved the way, dystopian. I've always read dystopian as regards to science fiction. I've never read them in this manner, or even when it's fantasy, probably, like I said, werewolf, dragons, vampires, fairies. But reading about these gods that we read in Yoruba classes, all these Yoruba mythology books, was quite I don't know what word to use. I still feel quite, it was a very good read, to be very honest. The writing was okay, although it felt complicated, and at some point I felt like the plotting wasn't following each other, and I was finding it a bit hard to follow some sequences. But overall, it was a good read. So one of the themes that followed the book was power and responsibility. You guys forgive my today. I feel like I'm not going through a proper sequence, because I didn't actually prepare. I just read it and I was like, I think I have to talk about this book. So it's just going to be a bit here and there, but I'm going to try my possible best to follow a proper sequence. So, like, one of the themes that was explored there was power and responsibility. So yeah, David Mogo possessed extraordinary because he was half man, half god. So he was a demigod. He had extraordinary abilities, but also the fact that this humane aspect of him, I think I liked that part of him too. Overall, the book also followed in your normal, should I say, fantasy themed, where there is this big villain that we are trying to exterminate, and there's this hero that doesn't even know himself a hero. He doesn't count himself a hero. He's trying to just survive. He follows your typical fantasy theme. He tries to survive. He's trying to make something of himself. He has unwielded powers and ability that he himself doesn't know he's wielding, and he has to go through follow some sequences of hardship, of suffering, of does this thing to for him to find himself, find his power, and literally, like a phoenix being born out of the ashes. That was the story they followed, and it was even mentioned. So that followed David Mogo's story. He had this unknown power, and he didn't know his lineage, he didn't know his heritage. All we knew at the beginning of the book, rather. It wasn't a movie. At the beginning of the book was that his mother was a very, very powerful Orisha. His mother was a very powerful god. And this his mother gave a friend who is another Orisha to give to a wizard to help her bring him up. Why? We never knew. Why she left him, we didn't know, at least at the beginning, not until towards the end. So we see how he survived with this his foster grandfather, who is also a wizard. This book, if you know, is he explored every spiritual theme. There were wizards, they talked about chants, they talk about casting, even they even explored in CBD. This it was an hieroglyphic writing system that involved symbols. That was when I realized that that means that the African, especially Nigerians, I think it's local to them, the southwestern region of Nigeria, had their own form of communication before them, the white men and whatnot. I remember a very long time that I saw something like that where people were talking about colonialism and whatnot, and they thought that Nigeria or different tribes in Nigeria, they have their own form of communication, of writing, before colonialism and the white men people and whatnot. So this was a very eye opener. I think this part of the book I was able to research a whole lot about it, that CBD was a way of writing. It was a writing system that involved symbols. It's just like when you read those Egyptians hieroglyphics. So it was very eye opening, because that means that we were our own people. We had our own systems, and it was, I think I felt proud in a way. I don't know how to explain, but that's not where we're going. It's just one of the things that I found in that book. So it shows that he really did his research. But I digress. Back to our theme. So we see that David Mogo came across Shango, like I mentioned at first, that Shango and his brother who staged a rebellion, and they brought that rebellion back on earth, especially in Lagos. So now they wanted to make Lagos a new spiritual place where spiritual being could stay. And we see how David Mogo was tactically brought into that picture, how he struggled with it, and how he was avoiding becoming an hero. That's very, very, should I say, very typical of a lot of these fantasy novels, where the least qualified person, the person who seems like the runt of the pack, the person who seems like the powerless, the weakest person, rises like a phoenix and becomes the hero. You know, that follows that pattern. That was not This book was not an exception now. But you see how he struggled with it, and that it now raises a question: that does having an ability to do something automatically make it your responsibility? And I saw that about him. You can see how he wrestled the idea of taking on this responsibility of being the one to defeat the gods that were so powerful that staged rebellion in the spiritual, in a place where the spiritual being lived. And he had half the power. He wasn't a full god, even. He just had half power and capacity and capabilities. And even being raised as a human and by human foster grandparent, adored all of those senses, that the half power that he had. So you can see how he struggled with it, and it begs the question that that a person has this ability, does it automatically makes that person responsible? And like most of our reviews here, whenever we're talking, is how we interrelate or interwoven them with our normal lives. And found myself thinking to that. True, it's something we all struggle with a lot of times. You see that you have the ability, you know that this is within your capability to do this or to be this person, but then the responsibility, when you think about responsibility, is it worth it? Sometimes you think, is it even worth it? What's the what comes from it? And one of the things that I've come to learn and garner as I've grown older is that as you grow older, as you attain freedom, as you get to some position, as you attain some height, responsibility becomes bigger, it becomes more. And it's not a walk in the park. When you think about it, you're responsible for a lot of things, you're responsible for a lot of people, you're responsible for a lot of issues. There's so much burden on your shoulders. You could have been living your life devoid of that sense or need of sense of responsibility, but then you find yourself being tumbled into a situation, being finding yourself in a situation, and you can't go back to the life that you once knew, of not being responsible, of not taking up this responsibility. At the same time, the fact that you have to take up this responsibility just doesn't make sense to you. That why should I be the one to do it? What is the reason why I should do it? Okay, yeah, I might have this capability or this capacity, but others might too. And it begs again the question of faith. I'm a believer of faith. I believe in faith. I believe in the fact that being predestined for some things. Although that isn't exactly a major theme here, but I saw it in that way, in that manner, although it came off as more mythological than normal, but I've always been a believer of faith and predestination, and that sometimes you can run away from faith all you like, but you will still end up doing what you're predestined to do. And it makes me think too that maybe the reason why you have these capabilities, even though you've not unearthed the power or you haven't really worked the full capacity of this power and this energy and all of these abilities in you, that maybe because you're called for something big, for something great, it's ingrained in you, it's put in you. And sometimes it might not show at the very start or at the very beginning of your life, but when you get to the point where you do need it, it comes up. That is one thing that I've really noticed about almost every fantasy book that I've read, is that feeling or that fate predestined theme subplot, and the fact that there is something ingrained in you for you to be able to take up that responsibility when time comes. And outside of faith, outside of fantasy and mythology and whatnot, I've come to also realize that too in normal day to day, that there are times that you look at some heights. It could be an exam that you want to write, it could be a certification exam, it could be a promotional exam, it could be a job, a type of job, it could be a project, it could be anything that you're very, very sure in your heart that, nah, I've never done this before, this is beyond me, this is beyond my capability. And you genuinely would have loved to do it, but you just know, realistically speaking, logically speaking, that I can't do it. And you can even defy all of those voices in your head and be like, let me just try it. And you find yourself trying, but still, you is like that reality is showing reality that I told you that this is beyond you. You can't. But then when you push through enough, when you fight through enough, probably by sheer will, probably by trying hard enough and making enough mistakes, you are able to break that threshold and you're just able to make it work. Outside a bit digressing from our thing, but it just, when you read all these kind of books or when you read books sometimes, or you just find yourself thinking about things outside of the scope or synonymous to what you're reading. And I couldn't help but think in this direction too. So another theme that was found or that was explored is the belief and certainty. So in this world that they have, in this dystopian world, the existence of God isn't even a matter of faith. Before, gods, spiritual beings, the orishas, the deities, and smaller godlings to the big deities, they were like mythology, something you didn't know. They were just myths. They were gods that you read about in books, that you were told, folklore that was passed from generation, family to family, especially families that had some type of gods that they particularly worshipped. So, but no, this time around, it's not a faith anymore. It's not belief. They were real. They took on physical shape according to the way our author wrote it for us. They took on shape of human being. Imagine Ogu. I mean, um Shango taking the body of a human, Oya, Olokun, they took physical beings like they took on the bodies of human bodies. They were seen, were touched, all of those things, although all in the sphere of our books. So now they are real, they existed amongst human and they were present. But still, that certainty didn't make life any less complicated. If anything, it made it more complicated, it made it harder, because their presence in the earth, in the earthly world, complicated human life. It eradicated life as humans knew it. Before they had come, according to the book, this was 10 years after they had fallen onto earth. So life was normal. The author even mentioned QC, King's College, Queen's College, how we went to Queen's, he was attending King's College. So life was very normal, it was very urban. So their presence did not bring about certainty, it didn't bring about organization. If anything, it brought chaos, it brought death, it brought barrenness, it brought complications. And it just goes to show that saying that says that sometimes it's good you don't meet your heroes or these things that you believe were supernatural, because careful what you wish for, or you might just get it and they did meet these beings, these gods, and it wasn't anything they believed it was. So the novel reminds us that sometimes something existing is very different from. And now imagine, God forbid this actually happens, because I don't know how we'll survive if that were to be real. But imagine if this happened, they were able to defeat Shango at the end of the story, but what would life seem like now? In the book, they had it was good and bad, because at the end of the day, only fire cancels out fire. A human cannot defeat a god. A- According to the book, and technically an orisha, they can, and human with your human capacity or power cannot defeat it. So now they needed fire to cancel out fire. So now it was a fight between the good gods, or evil and the lesser evil. That was how it is. So at the end of the day, when the whole fight had ended and they had able to conquer the much more evil, that's Shango and Nagunla, that is his brother, it now still it begs for reasoning that okay, there's still an existence of gods, these gods and humans. This is how we saw it. It wasn't an eradication of gods entirely, but more like an eradication of the evil gods that wanted to control humanity for their own gain and whatnot. But at the end of the day, there were still, according to the book, less evil gods that wanted the eradication of evil of the more evil gods. I feel like I'm contradicting myself in my words. So now it just tells you that sometimes when something is in your imagination, or it's just different when you know something as knowledge, or oh, I read this somewhere, I've been told about this. It's very very much different from when you experience it. I don't even think you need to be told, but I think more like it just solidifies that knowledge. And then another thing, the big thing, in fact, I feel like that could have been the first thing that I spoke about, but it's very, very obvious and very, very evident throughout the book, is the relationship between tradition and modernity. I think I loved where his creativity went there. It's not very often that a Nigerian or African team that are able to do that. Most times when you even read African or Nigerian team fantasy, mythology and whatnot, it dates back to times beyond before modernity. And even when there's a feeling of, should I say, urbanization in that books, the urbanization that still has to do with old times, archaic period, but nothing that speaks about contemporary like this day. I mean, he was talking about whiskey abroad, like airports, like it was like you would think about you were referring to someone that was talking about today. The book was published in 2019. So you can still say it's not new, but it's still fairly contemporary. So it still relates with even life as it is right now. So that relationship, the way he was able to merge it, and it made sense. It's not a very, very explored plot, and I think that gives kudos to him for being a speculative fiction writer. It's not a very explored theme in books, in fantasy, mythological African Nigerian fantasy. So that is a very uncharted territory. He did very good with it. It was creative, it made sense, and how ancient gods that spawn millennium self, how they were walking the streets and the parts of Lagos, modern day businesses, and they had to do with mainland people, police, they had to do with police and federal government. That was very creative of him. It was like a merge of old and new, and not treating old and new as new. In fact, if you weren't reading it from the angle of aspect of someone outside of this world, or someone who is living in a world that is urban, you will not be able to tell that, oh, this is old and this is new in a somewhat sort of way. That was like a combination of bad words. You guys, pardon me. But like, if you hadn't had the knowledge of what life seems like now, you probably wouldn't be able to tell that, oh, this guy is mixing old and new. It doesn't feel so evident, but you guys, let me just stop. But you guys don't have an idea of what I'm trying to say. And the way that these ancient gods were adapting, evolving, it goes to show adaptability as a skill every being. Adaptability at the end of it is a core skill for almost every being possesses it, be it terrestrial being, aquatic being, human beings, animals, even spiritual beings. Whenever they roam the earth, sometimes they take on the vessel, human vessels. And when you see some people, when they are manifesting and they are confessing, so this person is possessed. So I couldn't help but think in that way. I know it feels very weird and odd, but I can't help it. Then then we see one major theme, survival and purpose, are now intertwined. Those two are, it was very evident here too. So David Mogo began as someone who just wanted to leave. The reason why he took the job that ended up in trouble and ended up putting him up in this chaos in the first place was survival. That there was no means for survival, nothing to do to it, no work, no money. So when the one powerful wizard told him that he should go and capture two orishas and he's going to pay him 3 million, he could sense the trouble. He could sense that, red flag. But because of the need to survive and to provide for his aged foster grandfather, he had to do it, and just to stay alive basically. So we see how that need for survival was the first thing that pushed him further and further into purpose, before now realizing who he really was, that, oh, he's the child of Ogun, who is the god of war. Technically he's an heir. He also is a god of war, and now he eventually found his purpose and nursing his power as a god to as an orisha, how we now metamorphosized from a demigod who was just half human and half god, and becoming full on god himself, because a an orisha become an orisha, because that was the only way he could fight this big orishas I wanted to take over. And you could see how all of this he did it for the need and the love he had for humans and for the preservation of this of Lagos, according to the way the book was written, that of humanity and preservation. That was his purpose, not even that, oh, he wanted to become a god, he wanted to be this powerful being, an entity. If anything, all through the book you could see him fighting this purpose, that he didn't want it, but because of the love that he had for humanity, that why, and because he knew what life was before they came, and that the possibility of that continuing, that was what drove him. I love that that was his driving force. Aside from that, it wasn't that the need for power or the test for it. Nah, it was just the test for the preservation of humanity and life as he saw it, as he knew it before. Everywhere, you know how dystopian lives could be. May we never experience it though. But we see now it could be, where we watch it in more vivid visuals, like in movies, and we read it in pictures, barrenness, death, hunger, all of those things. So it just reminds you that sometimes purpose in itself self is not a grand revelation. It can be that you just slowly, surely, slowly, little by little find yourself into it, and you just grow into it more often than not. And so I couldn't just help but pity him sometimes, because he had to carry on responsibility. He had to push himself beyond beyond who he was, for burden he didn't even ask for. And as a first child, a first daughter, I almost could feel that aspect. I could understand him in some way and some manner, because you necessarily didn't ask for some responsibility, but you're born into it. You It's as if it was ingrained in you. You find yourself being nurturing, being encouraging, wanting to take care of your siblings, wanting to be this for your family, wanting to be that. Like, it's sometimes you are even lucky, you come from family that doesn't necessarily pressure you, but it's just somewhere deep down, it's deep seated. You don't even have to learn it. It's just the fact that you are born in that particular line as that particular person, probably as the first son, as the first child, as the first daughter, as the first person to really travel outside of Nigeria. So you have to take care of those at home. That responsibility, that burden, you didn't really ask for it, but you find yourself in it. You find yourself growing into it. You can't go back to the life you once knew. And the life that seems to be in front of you just feel like, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do I navigate it? Overall, it was interesting. It was a good read. Hard, really hard. Was very, very skeptical, and I kept looking back. Me, no matter how much I love a book, no matter how much I like something, no matter how much something interests me, if it goes against my convictions, or if my inner man is against it, I'll go drop am quick quick. I wouldn't want something that bothers me, or that I have to wrestle with my convictions over it, or that will cause, the Holy Spirit in my heart and asking me, really, so are you proud of yourself with what you've done? So I found myself really, because this was almost every orishas that I've read in Yoruba mythology were spoken. Olokun, Oya, Oshun, all these spiritual beings and entity that when you are praying, you are praying against them, and now you're reading them like you're reading a normal book, like to walk in the park. That just tells you also the power of good storytelling. And I'm not surprised the fact that the author is known as a creative writing scholar. That was quite evident in his book. There were little lapses, and I found myself hard few times having difficulty following some stories or some sentences or some patterns. But overall, it's for someone for a first read, it was good, it was all right. I didn't even plan on talking about this today, but I think in a way, maybe I felt muffled about reading it, and I assume I felt like talking about it will make me feel better. I don't feel any kind of way about it. I feel quite, it didn't do too much. It wasn't there to, he didn't, in the way he wrote it, he wasn't trying to convert us or trying to make us like Orishas. Or no, that was not even it. It was never, it wasn't like that in the book. He didn't show it like that, he didn't write it like that. There was no part of the book that inferred that way. So that was not an issue. I think because this is my first time really reading something like this, so it was well new and uncharted territory, and it was very, you could see he did a lot of its facts. And I loved what I learned too about NCBD, the writing system that involved symbols. I assume it was the Egyptians and the Assyrians. I think yeah, the Chinese too. That was their method of writing as well. I didn't know that Nigeria, especially the southern part of Nigeria, had that writing system. It was very eye opening. Overall, it was a good read. I I I still intend to read that Lost Ark that I saw. I intend to read it, but that's it about that, about David Mogo, Godhunter. I hope I didn't spoil. There wasn't a lot of spoilers. I couldn't help but say some things just to give you guys an overall feel about it. I hate spoiling books. I love that you should have an overall experience. If I One of the things that helps me with books, or to be able to enjoy some books, that some people will come up and say, it was boring, they didn't like it, because I don't check a book's review. I check the blurb and just see that it has an overall exciting feel to it, or something that I know that, oh, it reels me in. Other than that, I don't like reading reviews, because I know it's going to mar my feelings or give me a bias towards the book. So now I'm reading the book based on what someone else has said, and not what, I'm not reading on a clean slate rather. I really don't like that. So I try very much, as much as possible rather, that whenever we talk about books here, that I don't spoil it, just a reflective review of it. So guys, so much for not making it long, but that's it for today. Guys, I'll be seeing you guys when I know you guys will be hearing from me. Bye.